as we all know that in hematological malignancy it is much more higher, much more higher. But what I am talking about is solid tumors. So the incidence of any grade of anemia is about 90% altogether, with 86% in breast. Obviously in colorectal it increases to 91, gastric 98%, lung 93, ovary 93. So these malignancies, as we know, those which involve the GI tract would have much more incidence of anemia, or the malignancies in which the chemotherapeutic regimens are much more aggressive and toxic. They are bound to have. In nutshell, most of the malignancies, the common malignancies, they have an incidence of about 90% minimum of incidence of anemia if you take all the picture together. Now, this is as per the chemotherapy regimen. So it really doesn't. It also depends upon what regimen which you are using. We all know that chemotherapy is myelosuppressive. So if you're using a much more aggressive regimen like a dose-dense AC followed by T, or something like a TAC, or when you use something like a Carbotax or something like an Etocarb, you have much more incidences of anemia as compared to other regimens which are simply like a single agent or an AC or something like that. So it not only depends upon the malignancy, but also depends upon the type of chemotherapy regimen which is being used. Now, what is the impact? Now, why are we concerned? What is the impact of CIA? So, as we all know, anemia leads to fatigue, lethargy and dyspnea, and obviously impaired performance status. And as you can see in the graph below, the impairment of the performance status as the hemoglobin level starts declining, more than 12, less than 12, less than 10, less than 8, the performance status deteriorates. And this adds to a double problem to the patient, because once they have a problem of cancer, second, they are undergoing a chemotherapy, and the performance status also declines. And once this happens, when you assess the patient in your clinics, you tend to delay your chemotherapy regimens, or you decrease the dose of those regimens, because you want the performance status of the patient to be at an optimum level. But the problem here is you do that and you have a suboptimal response. So what anemia is leading secondarily is to a dose delay, dose reduction, a suboptimal response to treatment, while the underlying cause is not only cancer, but it is some sort of anemia which might be taken care of. And another thing, what happens when you have a CIA? When you have a CIA, the oxygen level of the tissue decreases, because obviously less blood, less hemoglobin, less oxygen delivery. The less oxygen delivery means hypoxia. When you have an hypoxia, there is resistance to chemotherapy. There, the aggressiveness of the tumor increases, the metastatic potential of the tumor increases, the radio sensitivity of the tumor decreases. So the aggressiveness of the tumor is increasing, while the therapeutic benefit in terms of radio sensitivity and the chemotherapy is decreasing. So it is indirectly also leading on to a decreased therapeutic response. So what is the rationale to treat CIA? Well, as per the previous slides, I have clearly told what is the rationale, and it is very clearly which can be understood. However, again, CIA is associated with multi-organ failure, with advanced cancer, and characterized by a variety of symptoms, and you want to avoid them. And secondly, it has a negative prognostic significance. How? By the virtue of the various factors I have already defined. So how do you evaluate anemia in patients undergoing chemotherapy? So I'm sure that most of us are doing so, but we have a tendency, you see, we understand the patient is having malignancy, then we feel that you are giving a chemo regimen. So we more or less take for granted that it's because of the cancer or because of the chemotherapy that the patient is anemic. And the simple way is just to write blood and leave it alone. But very important is to evaluate anemia. And this is how we should evaluate as per the latest NCCN guidelines. I'm sure most of us is doing it, but still this is something which we need to remind ourselves and which we need to consider when we are treating our patients. So when do you check for it? When the hemoglobin is less than 11 as per NCCN, or greater than 2 gram below baseline. So whatever baseline you want, it is less than 2. So the first test you order is CBC. And except for HP, what you really need to check is the MCV, because which will tell you whether it is a microcytic, a macrocytic, or a normocytic anemia, and a retic count, which will tell you whether there is some sort of hemolysis or the retic count is increasing, how's the bone marrow structure. Then what you should consider is hemorrhage. So very common in GI malignancies, specifically CRC and gastric malignancies. There might be stool in the blood. So you might do a stool test, or you might go for an endoscopy. Hemolysis. This is one thing which I feel that we tend to miss. Hemolysis. So when you are checking for anemia, please check the LDH levels also. Please check the indirect bilirubin levels also. If the indirect bil is high or the LDH is high, then you need to check for DIC. You need to check for direct and indirect Coombs test to see for the evidence of hemolysis. Then very common, you can have a nutritional deficiency. Iron we all remember, but what about B12 and folate? So I have a tendency to give B12 and folate to all of my patients. However, still the patient might be having some deficiency, and we need to work it out, especially in vegetarians. If you have a B12 folate deficiency, mind you, you can also have a B12 deficiency when you are dealing with a patient of gastric malignancy, because you know that the intrinsic factor is secreted by it. So many a times a patient has undergone a gastrectomy where the intrinsic factor is not secreted. Hence, you have a B12 deficiency. There can be some inherited disorders which are rare, but nonetheless, you can still ask for a family history. CKD, very important. We tend to miss. We know, we see the creatinine, we recalculate our chemotherapy values, but that CKD might be a cause of anemia. Secondly, radiation-induced myelosuppression. So you need to note down the radiation fields. Secondly, hormonal dysfunction. So here is one thing which is important. You need to see for hypothyroidism and hypogonadism. So when you are not finding out a cause of anemia before attributing it to malignancy, please check for thyroid function test and maybe check for hypogonadism as well. If you are not left with anything, most of the times you have an anemia of chronic inflammation. But to substantiate it, the CRP should be raised or an ESR should be raised. So it is not that you need to evaluate these causes and go for a battery of tests. There is a way to go about it, and the simple thing is to check for first the iron deficiency by the virtue of iron panel. And what all do you check in it? It is a serum iron, the total iron binding capacity, and the serum ferritin. So an absolute iron deficiency is defined as a ferritin of less than 30 and a transferrin saturation of 20. So the ferritin is low, the saturation is also low. Most of the time what happens is that we do not get transferrin saturation levels in the testings which we do. So TIBC, total iron binding capacity, is an indirect marker of transferrin saturation, but it is indirect and inversely proportional. So if the transferrin saturation is low, the TIBC is high. So if ferritin is less than 30, TIBC is high, be it sure, absolute iron deficiency, go for an iron replacement, check for HB after 4 weeks. Simple. You might have functional iron deficiency, and that is when you have ferritin in the range of 30 to 500 and a T-SAT of less than 50, that is TIBC of around 400. Here, what is this? This is a functional deficiency, and in these patients, you might go for an iron supplementation along with some erythropoietic therapy, which I am going to discuss. Then you have a ferritin of more than 500 and a T, but the saturation is still low. So here it is a functional iron deficiency. Here you should not consider iron supplementation because the ferritin store is very high. It is the functional problem that this ferritin is not being transferred. So you can consider IV iron supplementation for select patients, but usually do not give iron. And there might be no iron deficiency where the TIBC is also low and the ferritin is also high. Here, please do not give iron because unnecessarily there will be an iron load. Mind you, a thing which is not mentioned here in this summary is that once you give a blood transfusion, a single unit of blood contains a lot of iron. So multiple blood transfusions lead to iron depletion in an iron deficient individual as well. In an individual who does not have an iron deficiency, but you are giving blood by the virtue of the fact that the HB is low, you are already replenishing the iron stores. And in those circumstances, if you supplement iron as well, the patient is going into iron overload. So please be sure before starting iron therapy that you check for these parameters. Now here we have some parenteral iron preparations, and we have the low molecular weight iron dextran, ferrous gluconate, iron sucrose, ferrous carboxymaltose, and ferroxymoxifol. I have used gluconate and sucrose, and both of these are recommended in the IV form. Most of these regimens require a test dose. So, mind you, please do not give these preparations without a test dose. It might be very detrimental and can be a medical legal issue as well. So patients with confirmed functional iron deficiencies, mind you, I'm talking about functional iron deficiency where the ferritin is more than 30, but the transferrin saturation is low, should receive a dose of 1000 milligram iron given as a single dose or multiple dose according to the label of available IV formulation. Patient with confirmed absolute iron deficiency where the ferritin is also low should receive IV iron doses according to the approved labels of the products under correction. Now comes the major part, where is the role of blood transfusions versus erythropoietin stimulating agents. And this is the main crux of today's presentation, that where do you really need to consider blood transfusion versus ESAs. So again, we take the help of our favorite NCCN guidelines, and it says that in anemia in patients with cancer, if the patient is asymptomatic without significant comorbidities, just observe, don't do anything. If the patient is high risk, defined by progressive decline in HB with recent intensive chemotherapy or radiation, or the patient has comorbidities which might include cardiac, lung or cerebrovascular, then considered RBC transfusion, because these comorbidities are an additional source of load to the patient. However, if the patient is symptomatic, you need to treat the patient, and which would be sustained tachycardia, tachypnea, chest pain, dyspnea on exertion, lightheadedness, syncope, severe fatigue preventing and work and usual activity. So what are the indications and recommendations for RBC? You have to maintain an hemoglobin more than 7. We usually take the level as 8 when we give chemotherapy. So we consider transfusion in patients with hemoglobin less than 8 with pre-existing cardiovascular disease, but in malignancy we try those undergoing chemotherapy, we usually maintain it at a level of 8. And then we personalize as per the symptoms. And the various other guidelines, which is the ASPMO and the NCCN, also recommend in a similar way that nearly 7 to 8, while the NCCN says that in symptomatic anemia, you should give transfusions. So, who all receives Paxil? One who are hypovolemic and refractory to fluid resuscitation with crystalloid. So, once you know that once you give a blood, you are also increasing the volume, and might lead to a rapid thing, might lead to a failure. So, in those cases, you would like to give blood. Patients who have cancer and chronic symptomatic anemia unresponsive to iron supplementation, they should receive blood. Patients with cancer who require rapid correction of hemoglobin, because you have patients sometimes which have an HB of 5. In those case scenarios, you really need to give these blood transfusions. It remains controversial whether or not improving hemoglobin by blood transfusion improves the treatment response. It should ideally, but the studies are not categorical in telling us that whether these blood transfusions really help. But the problem what we practically face is that we try to maintain it at a minimal level for us to give the therapy, for which we really need to give be at a baseline of at least 8. Now, what is the problem? The blood transfusion possible risks are increased thrombotic events and possible decreased survival, but this incidence is comparatively lower as compared to those in ESAs. So when we use an erythropoietic stimulating agent, why we do not use it? We think that it would increase the thrombotic events and possibly decrease the survival. But if you see the risk associated with RBC transfusion, they also mention the same complaints. So it is not that these transfusions are absolutely safe. They are also probably equally difficult and equally problematic in patients with cancer, because they can lead to increased complications. So blood transfusion possible risk. So We know that allogenic blood may induce a thrombotic as well as inflammatory response, and this was reported by Khurana in an article where you had a odds ratio 1.6 in favor against the use of blood transfusion. A Cochrane review by Preston on blood transfusion anemia also showed that a significant increase of HbA levels and a subjective symptomatic response rate, or the patient survival varied greatly, ranging between 2 and 293 days, and a higher percentage of patients were dead after only 2 weeks from transfusion. So this was very unlikely, but these all studies just show that you do not take that these blood transfusions are also safe. They increases the chances of, they increase the mortality as well as the complications like thrombosis. So now coming on to the erythropoietic therapy. The main goal of erythropoietic ESAs are a gradual improvement in anemia-related symptoms and avoidance of transfusions. So they result in improvement of hemoglobin by 40 to 70%, which is a very good figure because 40 to 70% is all that is what we require. When we administer it in patients with chemotherapy-induced anemia, you have fewer requirements of RBC transfusion. The quality of life improves, and the mood and the cognitive functions of the patient also improves. So, what are the guidelines? The ESMO says that ESA therapy is recommended in patients with symptomatic anemia who receive chemotherapy or CTRT and present with an HB level of less than 10, as well as patients with asymptomatic anemia who receive chemotherapy and present with the HB level of less than 8. So symptomatic anemia less than 10 and asymptomatic anemia less than 8 in patients receiving CT or CTRT. Now, they give a target level of 12. Now, ASH 2019 says that it may be offered in CIA whose cancer treatment is not curative in intent and whose hemoglobin has declined to less than 10. So less than 10 and non-curative palliative setting. So an HP may be increased to lowest concentration needed to avoid or reduce the need for RBC transfusion. So what are the NCCN guidelines? The NCCN guidelines say the patients with cancer not receiving therapy, patients receiving non-myelosuppressive therapy, and patients receiving myelosuppressive chemotherapy with curative intent. These are the patients who should not receive it. So, though I've said so many guidelines, one might get confused. The simple logic here is that please do not give these agents in patients who are not receiving chemotherapy or chemoradiotherapy. One. Secondly, do not give it in patients who are in an adjuvant setting, in a curative intent. So, can be used only in a palliative setting in patients receiving chemotherapy or chemoradiotherapy. So, again, the risk of thrombosis, which is the major risk associated with ESA. The meta-analysis and individual RCTs consistently report a 50 to 75% increase of thromboembolism, and that is why these agents have not been in vogue and they are less. But then you need to consider what therapy you are giving. Supposedly, you are giving a patient a therapy like a thalidomide or lenalidomide or multiple myeloma. These patients would already be prone to more thrombosis because of these drugs. And if you give these ESAs in these settings, obviously the chances would increase further. Or you are giving doxorubicin or corticosteroids, which are again thrombogenic. So you need to take the entire picture into consideration that what drugs are you using, in which setting you are using. Now, this is the major concern that are ESAs linked to mortality and tumor progression? And what is the evidence and the consensus? So there have been studies which says that there was a reported possible decreased survival when the patients were received for ESAs and the correction of anemia was done to achieve a target HB level of more than 12. So one analysis in patients with cancer not receiving active therapy found decreased survival in patient treatment with ESAs. So there have been various meta-analyses, and 3 meta-analyses on survival are indicated an increased mortality with use of ESAs. The 2 meta-analyses indicate that they did not significantly affect mortality. So the problem, I tell you, you go through all these lines and you'll get confused. What it came out by going all through these data was that when you try to achieve an HB level of high, which is more than 12, you are increasing the thrombotic state and possibly increasing the mortality and decreasing the survival. However, if your goals are much more modest, like HB of 10, in those case scenarios, the mortality and is not increased and the survival is not hampered. This would be substantiated further as I go further in my slides. Now, as per ESMO in the late 2000s, the safety of ESA was discussed when meta-analysis suggested that ESA treatment may affect mortality in cancer patients if the HB level exceeded 12 grams. This is what I was talking about. Henceforth, various meta-analysis ESA did not affect tumor progression. So one thing, meta-analysis say that the tumor progression is not involved, but your levels, if more than 12 are there, then you have increased mortality. So the recommended HB target range for ESA treatment is 10 to 12 and not more than 12 by going through these data. And this should be gradual over a period of 4 weeks. It should not be like you want to increase it within a week or two. So management of anemia and iron deficiency patients with cancer, there is currently no evidence indicating an effect on ESA on stimulating disease progression or relapse when used within label and following recommendations for treatment of CIE. In 2017, the FDA determined that ESA risk evaluation mitigation strategy REMS program is no longer necessary. So this REMS program was one which said that if you have to use ESAs, these have to be used by some specialized hospitals who are trained in it and who have a certificate for it. And this risk evaluation and mitigation strategy had to be adopted. However, after the latest journals and articles, they found it to be safe and they removed these REMS criteria that they can be used if the clinician feels that it is falling within the usable parameters. So let us come on to the recent evidence, and this recent evidence is published from JH Journal of Thoracic Oncology 2019. It was a non-inferiority study for long-term safety and efficacy of darbepoetin alpha for chemotherapy-induced anemia in patients of lung cancer stage 4. These patients were expected to receive 2 or more cycles of myelosuppressive therapy, and their hemoglobin was less than 11. So it was randomized to 2:1 ratio to darbepoetin and placebo, and the primary endpoint was overall survival. The secondary endpoints were that how much were you able to avoid those transfusions. If you see the baseline characters, they were very well matched. But what I really want to get about the fact is that about a chunk of patients were Asian also. So this basically applies to our setup also, that the results of this study can be extrapolated to India, and amongst those Asian patients, 503 patients were from India also. So the data also involves the Indian patient, and this also should be taken into consideration. So how did they basically found the baseline characteristic? They basically divided it to less than 10 of hemoglobin, 10 to 11, more than 11. Then what was the median platelet range, ferritin range, transferrin saturation. So they were basically matched according to all of these criteria. And if we see the overall survival as compared to placebo, it was non-inferior. So that means that the darbepoetin was not increasing the mortality or decreasing the survival as it was initially feared. As per this latest data, that the survival was maintained. In fact, for that matter, if you see numerically, the median overall survival was 9.46 months, which was numerically better than placebo group, which was 9.26 months. Again, as per the OS data, also the darbepoetin alpha showed non-inferiority to placebo for PFS. The median PFS was 4.44 months in the darbepoetin alpha group and 4.27 months in the placebo group. Now, what were the adverse events? The most frequent adverse events of interest were hypersensitivity, which can be obviously more in darbepoetin group, and embolic and thrombotic events. The most frequently reported adverse events in the embolic and thrombotic events category were pulmonary embolism and DVT. So what was the author's conclusion? In the light of result of this study, darbepoetin alpha should be considered for patients with stage 4 NSCLC and anemia concomitant with chemotherapy, and they said that this trial showed that they were not increasing the risk of mortality. Now coming on to the various dosing patterns. So these are the various dosing patterns. Once you have 150 units per kg 3 times per week, then 40,000 units every week. Then you have darbepoetin alpha, which is given every week by subcutaneous injection, or the my favorite dosing, which is darbepoetin alpha 500 microgram every 3 weeks by subcutaneous injection, because that is much more convenient to the patient, decreases the amount of the number of times the hospital visit has to be made. Secondly, the dose should be adjusted for each patient to maintain the lowest HB level sufficient to avoid RBC transfusion. So I usually try to maintain it at around 10. In my patient, I do not reach up to 12. If HB reaches a level needed to avoid transfusion or increases by 1 gram per deciliter in 2-week period, reduce the dose by 25% for apopoetin and 40% for darbepoetin alpha, because as I told you previously, we do not want a rapid correction. That increases the chances of thrombosis. So if a dose of 1 gram per deciliter is being corrected in 2 weeks period, please decrease your dose of darbepoetin alpha. So this is again the alternative regimens, but I have told you the favorite regimens which I use. The other is darbepoetin alpha 300 microgram fixed dose every 3 weeks by subcutaneous injection, and it can be increased up to 500 microgram fixed dose every 3 weeks by subcutaneous injection as per the response, whether it is achieved or not. So the NCCN says that these ASA therapy should be discontinued when the chemotherapy course has been completed, which is roughly 6 to 8 weeks after the last dose of chemotherapy, or if there is no HB response after 8 weeks of treatment. So 2 ways: either your chemotherapy has got over, or if there is no HB response even after 8 weeks of treatment, that means that your patient is not going to respond to these therapies. Please stop the treatment. So you should know this, that 6 to 8 weeks after the last dose of chemotherapy, stop it, or 8 weeks of treatment. So 8 weeks is the crux. So what are the therapeutic interventions in chemotherapy-induced anemia? You have RBC transfusions, ESA administration, and intravenous iron supplementation. And this is the crux of all what I have presented by now. And this is the very important slide. We know the indication: symptomatic CIA, HB less than 8, or when we need to really have comorbidities. You have various advantages of each one of them, and each have its own advantages as well. So my approach would be that whenever I have a patient of anemia, first I would look for the cause. I would look for absolute iron deficiency, B12, folate, hemolysis, and everything. If I do not find anything and I find that it is because of a functional iron deficiency, then in those cases I would like to go for an ESA administration, provided that I am in a palliative setting where I am giving either chemotherapy or chemoradiotherapy. Mind you, before starting this treatment, I would always counsel my patient that I am giving this therapy. This therapy might have an increased risk of thrombosis, which is known, and some studies have shown an increased risk of mortality, which has been now, negated by latest studies. But this patient counseling is a must, and the patient must be apprised regarding the risk of increased thrombosis. After informed consent, I would start with my 3 weekly dosing, which is my favorite dosing, and then look for a response. And I would make it gradual over a period of 4 weeks. If I do not achieve any response by 8 weeks, I'll stop my treatment. And also I'll stop my treatment if I do not, complete my chemotherapy course gets completed. Secondly, RBC I would consider when I would like to, replenish the HB levels very fast, where I have a very severely low HB levels and a symptomatic anemia or some comorbidities. In those cases, I would use a PRBC transfusion. So thank you. That would be all from